because when you hear about MMT, it almost sounds like I'm telling you up is down, left is right, and just everything is just completely backwards from the way that you understand it.
So, yeah, we won't play the guilt by association stuff. The fact that there are a lot of leftists who really are into MMT is probably because the leftists are just economically illiterate and they think it just means free money. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that, and it is growing in the movement, and it really came out of a trader in the 1990s. Actually, he was noticing certain patterns in the 80s, and they made some money because there was this fear that Italy was going to default, and the modern monetary theory thing said, well, Italy's not going to default, it can't default, it won't default, because that's a political decision, it's not an economic inevitability. So they made about $100 million betting that Italy wasn't going to default, and when your theory has netted you $100 million, I could see getting behind that. I could see that being a thing. So we're going to talk about modern monetary theory really as a discussion. There's stuff that I understand about it. There's stuff that I don't understand about it. I do want to learn more. I do have reservations/fanatical oppositions, but I'm sure we'll get into those. So without further ado, I guess if you guys would like to, and we've got time today. I booked off some chunk of time because it's a big and important topic. If you guys want to get started, we don't have any sort of formal structure. It's just kind of a conversation. If you want to get started and just let people know the story of modern monetary theory, how it came about, the influence that it's having, how you came into it, what has appealed to you, and also if you could mention a little bit about your own political leanings, that would be very helpful.
Well, let's start with our own political leanings. Well, I would say, Steph, I got a lot of my political leanings from listening to you. So, I don't know, back in 2012 or something is when I discovered you, and I converted me to anarchism. And I actually started learning about economics from listening to your podcast. And I was very staunchly an Austrian. Well, I consider myself aligned with the Austrian perspective. And it was actually Nima who apparently had a conversation with you back in like 2016 or something, and started posting on your FDR boards when they still existed.
Yeah, that's how we met, by the way.
Yeah. And he was posting this MMT stuff, which looked like entirely gobbledygook to me as someone who was, Austrian team, basically. And I started arguing with him, and he always had a very clear and concise answer back to me. And after several posts, I was like, give me your Skype information. I got to talk to you. And Nima just had these patient posts or patient responses to everything I can get at him. And I was like, okay, this isn't, I don't like where this is going emotionally. And because when you hear about MMT, it almost sounds like I'm telling you up is down, left is right, and everything is just completely backwards from the way that you understand it. And it was when I was listening to Warren Mosler, a speech by Warren Mosler, who is, for everyone who doesn't know, the person that Steph was just talking about who came up with this concept of MMT was Warren Mosler. And he was given this speech at a college or something, and he had this graph in the back of I think it's the deficit, the tax revenues, and the trade deficit. You know what graph I'm talking about? Okay, well, I believe it has those three variables on it, and they make this exact mirror of each other.
Oh, the sectoral balance.
Yeah, thank you. The sectoral balance chart. And Warren Mosler was going, look, the reason that these are an exact mirror to each other, of each other to the penny, is because there's no other place for the money to come from, because the government has the monopoly on the issuance of currency. And I went, I never thought of it that way. And then I had to go back to Nima and say, okay, tell me everything again, because I'm not going to fight you this time.
So, sorry, this is the argument that the public sector deficit is a private sector credit.
And it to take it one step further, there's no other place for that credit to come from. Asterisk, we could talk about the private banking system and how that affects things. But the public sector deficit. So the easiest way to understand this is like filling up a bathtub. So if you've got a bathtub, there's a spout that comes in and there's a drain that goes out. And let's say the bathtub is the economy and the water is the money. If you turn on that bathtub, it starts filling up. You turn on that faucet, it starts filling up the bathtub with water. Well, if you got it stopped and you just keep blasting it full of water and it starts overflowing, that would be too much money in the system. Well, if you drain it out and you let all of it drain and there's no money in the system,
Taxes.
That's taxes. That's not enough. And so MMT is, I mean, this is like the really basic way to look at it, is saying, how do we control how much water is in that bathtub? And what does it mean, like when it's too full and overflowing? What does it mean when it's empty? And because if we look at money as a commodity that was derived from barter, this is really hard to understand. Because, and as I have understood the story that the Austrians tend to say of where money came from, is that originally people bartered, and then there was eventually something that got bartered more often than everything else, and at some point that thing was the thing that became money, and that's why money goes back to being a commodity. Versus there's this other theory that money is actually based off of a credit system, and that human beings naturally set up methods of keeping track of each other using credit. And we got a book here that I just want to show the title. Debt, the First 5,000 Years, goes over this in explicit and painstaking detail, and is very fascinating. And what MMT points out is that while human beings have this natural tendency to create credit systems, very quickly the state says, well, I want to monopolize that. And then I can control. So the only way to get credit is from me, because the only credits that I will accept as taxes are the ones that I issue. And I don't know if you could say throughout history, and let me say this, modern monetary theory is kind of a misnomer. Actually, it's really a misnomer. I think it's probably more accurate to call it ancient monetary theory, because it explains any system all the way back. There's this argument that I often hear that modern monetary theory was designed by Warren Mosler to explain the money system after 1970, whatever year it was that Nixon finally got rid of the gold standard.
Yeah, sorry, just interrupt very, very briefly. So this argument goes somewhere along the lines that we don't have a monetary theory that explains untethered fiat currency. 1971, Nixon ended the convertibility of gold and the US dollar, and we just don't have a way of explaining economics with a completely untethered economic fiat currency system. And MMT, I think, claims to be able to explain it in a way that older systems based upon the tethered to something monetary system. You look at ancient Rome, they were still tethered to the bimetallic gold and silver standard. They just happened to corrupt all of their coins, mostly with crap. But it really is a way of saying, okay, so if we have a currency system that's entirely made up, so to speak, right, by the government and enforced by the government, you can't compete with it, you can't counterfeit, and of course you have to pay your taxes in government dollars, which is a foundational drive for why it has value in society. Right. How do we explain a system that is unprecedented in human history, which is an entirely made up financial system where the government has monopoly control over the creation of currency? MMT says, like, we finally caught up to what's been happening since 1971 and we can explain it better. Is that, I don't want to characterize it wrongly because you guys are the experts, but is that a fair way to put it?
No, that's what we hear often, and we're saying that MMT actually describes it all the way back.
Okay,
so whether or not there, and you're using the word tethered, the MMTers like to use the word fixed, whether it's a fixed monetary system or a floating, or a fixed currency or a floating currency. The MMTers say the rules are the same, but in a fixed system, these things happen, and in a floating system, these things happen, and you just have to understand what's going on. And I would also point out, and in Debt, the First 5,000 Years, it goes over this as well, is that for the evidence that we have, and it's mostly Sumerian records because they put it on clay, which stood put the records on clay, which stood the test of time, and one of their favorite records to record were tax records. Is that Credit money is older than gold and silver coinage. Gold and silver. So we have records of credit money going back to about what was 3000 BC. That's when the
More.
the old. Well,
3500.
35. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then gold and silver coinage starts to come around, particularly in the
800 BC.
Yeah, in the Mediterranean world about 800 BC, and then around I think 600 AD, you start to see it disappear again and get replaced by a credit system, and around 1400 AD or so, we start seeing the world switching back over to gold and silver coinage and bullion. And again, now in 1971, we're back over to credit again. And the so MMT just looks at it and says, well, you either have here's the rules of money creation. You still have the tub with the faucet, whether or not you have a fixed currency. However, if you have the fixed currency, your ability to turn that faucet on whenever you want becomes restricted. And I understand that typically the Austrian argument is that's a good thing. However, we're going to make the argument that it's typically not. The point standing aside that we also agree that the government makes really, really stupid decisions and spends its money on really, really stupid stuff most of the time. So we're not arguing with that at all. But this is going to sound really weird, and I understand that. Employment is a government created phenomenon, or excuse me, I should say unemployment is a government created phenomenon, because I demand a tax in this arbitrary token that I made up, and you go, well, how do I get this tax? Oh, how do I get this token in order to pay this tax? And I say, well, you got to work for me, and I'll give you this token.
It is the origin story of monetary systems, according to MMT, basically. What you're talking about right now, Dylan.
Yeah. And I lost my train of thought. Where were we?
So you need to pay someone that token.
Yeah, unemployment. Yeah, thank you. So if there's unemployed people, and I understand this is more complicated, like with a welfare system, and you have people who have low IQ who can't necessarily be employed because they're too dumb to do it. But in an economy, the simple description is, if you have unemployed people, that means there isn't enough money to go around for everybody to pay their taxes. And that means the government is not deficit spending. That I would even say that the word deficit is kind of is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to what the federal government is doing. It's not deficit spending enough for the population to have enough money to exchange with each other to be able for everyone to be employed to pay their taxes.
Pay the tax and to have the savings buffer that we observe. People have a certain demand for a savings cushion so that they can be prepared for future eventualities, for future taxes, etc. So that's the liquidity preference that Keynes has talked about at one point, which means that there has to be a certain amount of surplus money injected into the private sector through deficit spending in order for the economy to function.
And one thing I want to add, because Steph, you mentioned Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez at the beginning of this that are big proponents of pushing MMT, and you mentioned that leftists hear this, and if they're not neoliberals and they just shove it out to begin with, they go, "Oh my God, we finally found the free stuff magic wand. Like I can just have everything for free. I can get my housing for free, I can get my food for free, I can get my college for free, I'll get my student loans paid off, and blah, 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 all this stuff." And I think the biggest error that the leftists see is they don't understand incentives. Like, I mean, learned from listening to your economic stuff over the years, is that if you give free incentives to everybody, you're just going to. I mean, we're seeing this right now in the United States, where so many people are being paid to stay home because they're making more money staying home than they are going to work. I mean, where I live right now, I'm in the Seattle area. There's a complete labor shortage, and everybody's looking for help. But I mean, why would I work if I'm going to take a pay cut?
Right. So, no, that's good. Can I just I wanted to just put a little bit in as far as sort of I see the evolution of the idea and why. So, of course, the Austrians have been saying, what is that old saying that Peter Schiff is right twice every 20 years? You know, that the Austrians have been saying that there's going to be inflation. It's going to be massive inflation because look at all this money printing. Look at all this money printing. And I've been hearing this. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember when I went to my first libertarian conference, I was probably 18, maybe 17 or 18. And of course, you hear, oh my gosh, look at this debt, look at this, the deficit, look at the money printing. Oh my God, it's been untethered. There's no gold standard. There's no restraint. They're just like 80s traders on cocaine, hookers' bellies, you know, the whole kind of thing. So I've been hearing about this. Now, there was, of course, significant inflation. Like here in Canada, I've told the story a million times, like the 10-cent candy bar that went to $1 over the course of my childhood. And it's been fairly stable ever since, right? So they'd say, okay, well, look, if it's praxeological, like true by definition, there's no way around it. If it's praxeologically true that an increase in the money supply causes an increase in prices, particularly we're looking at 07, 08, right, where there's some estimates, they say officially about $1 trillion, but there's some estimates that about $27 trillion went into the financial system. Okay, where's the inflation? The Fed keeps creating all of this money. And of course, the big one, which is one of the reasons why we're talking, the big one, of course, is COVID, right? So you've seen a massive expansion in the money supply under COVID. Where's the inflation? Now, of course, people will say, well, the price of lumber has gone up and it's $30,000 more in housing. I get it, but that's not the kind of inflation that the Austrians have been talking about. You know, the Weimar inflation, the ancient Roman inflation, the French inflation of the 18th century. That's the hyperinflation, the wheelbarrows of money, all the complete dislocation, Zimbabwe-style inflation, and so on. What's been going on in Venezuela? That's the kind of stuff they're talking about it. They're saying, okay, look, your theory predicted that we would see massive inflation based upon all of this excess money. And then, of course, this is a big thing that the MMT enthusiasts point towards is, hello, Japan, 240% of, what is it, deficit on GDP, right? I'm sorry?
Public debt to GDP.
Public debt to GDP.
Highest of all industrialized nations.
By a lot.
Yeah, and yet they actually have to sometimes battle deflation. Now, I mean, my argument is...
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, please go ahead.
My wife is Japanese, and her parents live in Japan. They bought a home for $1 million at some point, and they just sold it for $260,000. Well, and when I went to Japan for a wedding ceremony. I could not believe how cheap stuff was. I've heard my whole life how expensive Japan was, and we were just like, our money's going so far. What the heck? Like, this is crazy.
And the Austrian theory, of course, doesn't account for that. Now, I would put in a little sideways argument here. I don't want to derail. I just wanted to point out that I think a lot of what's driving the deflation in Japan is the collapsed birth rate. Because when you have a birth rate, you know, there's like more diapers required for old people than babies in Japan. You got a birth rate that's like 1.1 per couple. And so because you've got such a catastrophically low birth rate, you just demand is way down because people sit in their parents' basement watching anime and playing video games rather than going out and starting their own families and buying a whole bunch of stuff, you know, and you become a parent. It's like a bunch of ferrets just start attacking your wallet from here to eternity. I saw this meme the other day of, dads, when their kids go to college and stop leaving the fridge door open, and it was a dad just covered in money, And so I would say that you can keep inflation down even if you have a large deficit, but what you have to do is cripple the next generation so that they don't buy stuff because they're too depressed or whatever, right?
Well, and then I would say that the point you brought up, I completely agree that that's a factor. And I think what's important when understanding inflation and also hyperinflation is that it's a very complicated issue that has lots and lots of factors, one of which is money supply, one of which is the population, one of which is demand on services, and then, I mean, you brought up lumber. I'm actually in I'm a project manager in the construction industry, and my subcontractors are just agonizing because I make them buy a lot of the materials of like, can you give us some more money because a sheet of plywood is now $80 instead of 20.
Yep.
And from what I saw, the price of timber hasn't gone up, but the price of lumber has gone up like 5 times. And in the Seattle area, it completely confuses me because we've got the trees, we've got the lumber mills, and we've got the lumber yards, and I'm like, what's the problem? Why is it so much more expensive? And I think the reason is there was a supply shock that wasn't meeting demand, that was really, really screwed up by the lockdowns because all the shipping got screwed up. And was it Mike Norman who posted on the lumber futures? Apparently lumber futures just tanked. Yeah. Like, I mean, you see it going up like this over COVID, and it just goes like a week or two ago. So I'm hoping that means that those prices are going to come down soon, so my subs will stop complaining. But just to finish the point before you say it, is when it comes to inflation and hyperinflation, one of the things we really want to emphasize is there's lots and lots of factors to talk about. And it's not just more money equals inflation, less money equals deflation, and that's the end of the story.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just one of the many levers available in the economy. So if I could just boil it down for the listeners, and you guys tell me where I go astray, because I certainly don't want to mischaracterize the perspective, but it's something like this. Look, we think that the government runs like a household, but that's completely false. So in a household, if we can't afford stuff, if we're too much in debt, if we've got too much debt, too much deficit in it, we just got to cut back on our spending, and that's the only way we can get back on track. Or one of the statements from Charles Dickens that literally seared itself into my Protestant poverty brain as a kid was the following statement. I can't remember which book it is, and it was expenses £20 a year, income £20 1 shilling, result happiness. Expenses £20 a year, income £19 19 shillings, result misery. Right, and it's that fine line, and we've all had to juggle this. If you've been in school and you've been in debt and you're broke and you got to borrow to get through, patch things along, like some you're trying to get off a desert island with some sheeting rock or something like that. So we all know, and because we judge the economy according to the standards of our own personal finances, our own personal household finances, we think of the government as the following entity. Well, it gets a bunch of taxes, and if it spends more, that's its income, and if it spends more than it receives in taxes, you get a deficit, and eventually that causes Weimar, or that causes some economic catastrophe. And as far as I understand it, again, the idea of MMT is, well, you're just not you're not comparing apples to apples, because you're comparing a household, which is a money consumer, with a government, which is a money issuer. And a money issuer is not at all in the same economic ballpark as a money consumer, right? Because we can't create currency. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when I said at the beginning, it's going to sound like I'm telling you up is down and left is right. It's because for the government, and when we mean specifically the federal government, well, this doesn't apply to local governments because they don't issue their own currencies. The federal government, the rules feel like they're backwards, where when they take in money in taxes, money gets lost. When they print too much money, more than they took in taxes, that's more money into the system.
That's our money.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this is what I wanted to get a point. So I think the way that we look at it, and this is just like mapping the territory we'll be discussing. So the way that we look at it, of course, is the government taxes our money, and that's its income. And well, no, not at all. The way that the government works is the government creates money, puts it out there into the economy, and then claws some back in the realm of taxes, right? So that's a very, very different scenario. Like, it doesn't have, like, if you go and you pay your taxes using cash, using dollar bills, they'll say, hey man, thanks for paying your taxes. And then, do you know what they do with those dollar bills? You guys can tell them. What do they do? This is literally what they do with your dollars if you go and pay your taxes. What do they do?
Although I have heard, because Warren Moser brought that up, they shred some of them.
Yeah, they shred the old ones, but whatever.
But it's still the same point, where it's like, it's just a piece of paper that we make up and we'll make a new one. Fine.
Yeah, it does. You see what they can do, which you and I can't do. Like, somebody pays a debt to me in some old dollar bills, I'm not going to shred them. Why? Because I can't type new ones. Because I'm not a money creator. I'm a money consumer. And so if you pay, I don't know, a $10,000 bill, 5,000 of them, $10,000 tax bill in cash, 5,000 of those bills are old, they'll shred them. Why? Because they can just type another 5,000 into their own bank account. So the idea that the government creates the money, pushes it out into the economy, and then claws some of it back in taxes is a redirect of thinking that is a way of looking at the alternate dimension of money creation versus money consumption. Is that a fair way to at least start? Because I remember we talked about this last time, and you were saying, look, the government creates a whole bunch of money, and deficits allow money to stay in the private sector, right? Make me make sure I've got that correctly, right? Because if the government runs a deficit, it means that they're clawing back less money in taxes than it's spending.
There's water left over in the bathtub.
Yeah. So, Steph, you're a big free market guy. If I, I was a little spun around by the argument last time, but further research, like, you're a big free market guy. What the hell are you doing objecting to more money staying in private hands? Like, deficits are a way of just leaving money in private hands. You're a bad capitalist, man. Bad capitalist.
Well, and then I will admit, as I actually still consider myself an anarchist. I don't know if you do too.
Yeah.
This poses a serious philosophical conundrum if you subscribe to the non-aggression principle and the self-defense principle. Is that it's like, well, if the government needs to spend in order for the money to be there for the private sector to work, that I'm kind of giving the government a reason to exist, and I really don't like that. I don't know how to square that circle at this point.
Everyone, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us grow this channel. I think we cover a lot of good stuff. We're covering ideas that you're not hearing anywhere else. Economic ideas, historical ideas, systematic politics ideas you're not hearing anywhere else.